Hi everyone, it's Emma and I'm back with another Chemistry WJEC video. I am going to look at naming salts today and it'll make sense as I go along. So any videos that I think link to this, so I think you should have probably watched the introduction into acids and bases and the neutralization video before you watch this one, but it doesn't matter, they're not that long, so you can, you know, flick backwards and forwards. So in GCSE you need to know about 3 acids, so you need to know the names of them, and those acids are hydrochloric acid, nitric acid and sulfuric acid, and these are the ones that where you'll need to name their salts that they make. So basically there's loads of acids, but luckily you only need to know about these 3. And what you need to know is that if you have a hydrochloric acid, you will always make a chloride salt. And you can see it in the name. It's not as easy with hydrochloric acid. It's probably the hardest one really, because it doesn't, I think some people like start thinking about the beginning of the word. It's not. The chloride comes from the chloric. So if I make a chemical reaction happen and I use hydrochloric acid in it, I will make a salt, and that salt will have the word chloride in it. If I use nitric acid, I am always going to make a nitrate salt. And if I have sulfuric acid, which is with an F, in the UK, we used to spell it with a PH. So old textbooks will have it with a PH, and I think America was F. So they decided, like the science community, that everyone should do it the same to make science universal. So it's spelled with an F now. I don't ever think that they will mark you down for putting a PH because there's so many textbooks that are wrong. But sulfuric acid is with an F. And if you use a sulfuric acid, you will always make a sulfate salt. So I'm going to go into more detail with this now. Salts always have 2 names, like a person. I know some of you are going to say, well, I've got a middle name. Yeah, I've got a middle name too. I'm just trying to help you remember things. I can't find my rubber. There it is. So they've always got 2 names. I've only given you the second name so far. So if you have a hydrochloric acid involved in your chemical reaction, the second name of your salt will be chloride. So let's say the rule is if you mix an acid and a base, you always make salt, sat, I've just put there, salt, bit dyslexic, sorry, plus water, right? So they will give you parts of the equation, but let's say, or they might write it out and you need to pull out the equation. So let's say you've got nitric acid to start off with. Nitric acid. In fact, I'm going to change that. We're going to do that in a minute. We're going to start off with a metal. So let's say we react a metal with an acid. Now this is known as MASH. Metal, M, acid, A. When you mix a metal and an acid, it's not the same as base. It's not the same as metal and base. Metal and acid always makes salt plus hydrogen. And I always find people always remember this, the MASH, and then they forget the other bits. But MASH only works if you've got a metal and an acid. M-A-S-H, MASH. So if I mix a reactive metal, so like gold wouldn't work because gold's unreactive. But if I mix a metal that will react with acid, it will always make a salt plus hydrogen. And the only difficult part of this is naming the salt. So we've already gone over the fact that they've got 2 names. A salt has 2 names. The second name will always come from the acid. The first name comes from the metal. So let's say I've got sodium. Sodium is a metal. How are you going to know that in your exam? My periodic table's way over there. Because you're going to do your staircase, and the left side, or the side that's got the most elements on, they are your metals. The majority of the things on the periodic table are metals. Sodium is right on the left side. It's a reactive metal. So let's say I've got sodium and I mix it, I make a chemical reaction happen with nitric acid. So I've got sodium which is a metal, plus nitric acid. And it's always going to make a salt plus hydrogen. Hydrogen is hydrogen. You don't need to know anything about that. It's just hydrogen. So we know it's going to make the salt, which we're going to learn how to name now. Give it more space. And it's going to make hydrogen. I want to just write H2, but I'm going to keep it in words. So the first name of the salt comes from the metal word. What's the metal word here? Is sodium. So the first name of the salt is sodium. The second name of the salt comes from the acid. We've used nitric acid. Nitric acid always gives us a nitrate. So the second word is going to be nitrate. And that is the rule, really. That's how you name a salt. The first name comes from the metal word, and the second name comes from the acid. If you had sulfuric acid, the last name would be sulfate. If you had hydrochloric acid, remember it doesn't go from the hydro, it's from the chloric. If you had hydrochloric acid, your last name of your salt, or your second name of the salt, would be chloride. You've got to look for the metal word in things. So I've decided to do the mash first. We'll move on to acids and bases. I'll see, I might do it in this video. You've got to recognise metals, and I understand, like things like iron or copper, you're going to know that they're a metal from everyday life. Aluminium, you'd know that that's a metal. But there are metals like potassium, lithium, you probably know magnesium would be a metal, but you might not know that they're metals. Calcium, people never think calcium is a metal, but it is. And you're going to use your periodic table. Let me go and get mine. You're going to use your periodic table to know your metals. You've got your staircase in it. The baddies always go down to the police. So this is useful in year 10 and 11. All of this stuff on the left are metals. So if you see the word rubidium, you know that's a metal because it's all the way over here. This hydrogen, you've just got to know that hydrogen is not a metal because it's a gas, and gases aren't metals. So if you use the periodic table, you should be able to name your salts, even if you don't know whether the word is a metal. You'll find it on here. So let's say, for example, this is another mash. We're going to do metal plus acid. So let's say the metal is potassium. And I'm going to react it with hydrochloric acid. This is why I like word equations, because acid, you're not even going to be able to understand this really. Metal plus acid always makes salt plus hydrogen. So we know it's going to make hydrogen at the end. I'm going to put H2 because I can't be bothered writing hydrogen. What's the metal name? Remember, the salt, the first name comes from the metal. The second name comes from the acid we've used. Well, in this, potassium, if you're not sure that that's a metal, you look on your periodic table, potassium is here, all the way on the left. It is a metal. So the first name of your salt is going to be potassium. The second name will come from the hydrochloric acid. If you use hydrochloric acid, what's the second name? It's chloride. So the salt we made this time is potassium chloride. So there's so many different salts. There's not just one type of salt that you put on your chips. That's a certain type, but there's so many different we can make. I'm just going to check. I think I'm going to leave this video like this. I will link the acid plus base in the description box, and I'll move on to the next video with that. So thanks for watching. I hope you can see my head in this. I've gone on my knees for some reason, and I'll see you next time.